Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Indie Game the Movie. And this is the winner of my monthly Patreon movie review raffle. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below, go to the Patreon pledge, and maybe I will be reviewing your movie next month. As someone who doesn't really play video games and presumably, maybe hasn't played an indie game, I guess I'm sort of maybe a weird choice to review this, but whatever. Indie Game the Movie isn't necessarily a history of indie games. They give you a history in it, but it's not just about the history. It's mainly about 3 games and 4 kind of creators or developers, I guess, of those games. And that would be Super Meat Boy with the developers Edmund McMillan and Tommy Raffines, I think. And then we also have Jonathan Blow, who has already made his game and it's already out at the point which they talk about in this documentary and how much of a success it was. And that would be Braid. Phil Fish, who is still developing and taking a really long time to perfect and get ready his game of Fez, which he's been working on for a very long time, but would come out, I think, like a month before this movie actually came out. So, and documentaries take a long time, but I think Fez took even longer. Although I don't necessarily know what it's like to code or make a video game, I guess I can definitely relate to kind of the passion that these guys have. Jonathan Blow is more just like talking about stuff in a cafe. You don't see him really working on anything. So it's a little weird to say. I mean, he does have as much screen time as the other guys, but it's a different focus point. When we come to Phil Fish and Tommy Raffines and Edmund McMullen, you seem to be able to really kind of understand all the passion and hard work that goes into it. Particularly with the development of Super Meat Boy, you kind of get a lot of that, basically because they're like kind of struggling to get out before a release date. Not struggling, I guess, but really pushing hard to get towards a release date. I think it's interesting to show this world because it's a world I don't really know. I would probably like a documentary that's just about the history of it. I don't really know any other major indie games, and I feel like in the 4 years since this movie's been released, there's probably a lot of stuff that's probably happened, I assume, which I'm sure everyone will say in the comments or something, but it's probably true. And so this is kind of the limited kind of version of that to 2012, but I guess it kind of makes it a little more universal and not as dated by not just doing a straight history, which would probably be sort of a lot more boring and stuff. And focusing on this gives it kind of more of a universal quality, and hoping that these games and people will want to see interviews with these creators, I guess, gives it more play that you'll probably want to watch it a couple years later after maybe history-wise these people might not be as important. So, you know, they don't want to call it Indie Game the Movie 2012, although I guess I will when I post my title of the review. But I think they did a good job of giving it a very human side to it. That's kind of the main plus for this film, is really the humanity and the personalities of these developers. The movie itself is fairly standard documentary-wise. I think that's often a problem with documentaries, where people will look at a documentary and not really think about how it was made. They more think about what they're getting from it. How this was made was fairly standard. It even has like kind of like hipstery beep boop sad music and stuff throughout, which feels like such a cliche. I'm sure like 20 years later I'll probably think it's a little more interesting because it'll be like, oh, the 2000s or something like that. But at this point I just find it kind of cliched and boring. I don't find it particularly interesting. It's not even a very unique version of that music, to be honest. I wouldn't say these filmmakers were doing anything different in terms of the making of this movie in the documentary genre, but in terms of, I don't really know many documentaries about video games, and this seems to be probably one of the bigger ones, and they were able to make someone like me who doesn't, I've heard of Fez, but I sort of have heard of Super Meat Boy. I definitely have not really heard of Braid. To get someone like me into it, I think shows the power of this documentary, because you could say that this is only appealing to the people who play video games, which is a lot of people. I'm sure you do fine, but this has a broader kind of sense to it because you're able to follow these people and follow their passion. And I think the passion behind how they're making the games is really what gets you in, because most people can semi-relate to that. Maybe not, you know, actually making a game relate to it, but relate to it in a way that they understand these people, and particularly Phil Fish, Edmund McMillan, and Tommy Raffines. The Jonathan Blow story, he's more relaxed, he's more of a talking head throughout. You get that his reputation and things like that, and how obsessive he can get, and how it is kind of a smaller enterprise when you're doing these indie games. I think you get that from him, but you get that from the other guys as well. But with Phil Fish, who's probably, I guess, more of a controversial figure because of, you know, it took him so long to make Fez, and then he refused to make the sequel and left the gaming industry completely, probably because it was quite an arduous arduous experience, it seems. And he even says, you know, if he doesn't finish his game, he will kill himself, and he's making this game to stop him from killing himself, which is fairly melodramatic, I'd say. But it shows like how much passion he has. And same with Tommy and Edmund in their section about Super Meat Boy. You get like how strenuous it is, how hard it is, how long they've spent on it, how they need to get it out to be sold on Xbox Live. Although apparently I learned afterwards they actually sold like more copies on PC. That was interesting because they do emphasize that Xbox Live part, particularly in that part of the beginning where they're like, oh my god, it's not, where is it? Where's the game on Xbox? Which was a totally like false plot point. I think that was probably one part I would just completely cut out, because then the game's a success and like that part really didn't go anywhere. It just shows like kind of how hard a release date is, so I guess maybe a little bit, but I kind of felt it like kind of just detracted for no other reason to do that. They could have said, well, launches are like this, and it just felt like after they got past that beat, it was just like forgotten completely. I can relate to like having so much passion about something and like this hard steadiness to do it and hopefully be a big success. And I guess I can relate to working hard on something you really like and you really love, which would be kind of these videos and this YouTube channel and things like that. But what's weird, while I was watching this, I was thinking this, and maybe this is personal, but you know, who cares, I guess, is that I could relate to the hard work part and I could relate to the dream and the passion of it, but I couldn't relate to the part where they become successful. I was like, maybe there's a part they cut out where that makes sense somehow, but not that the film was weak because of it. It's just kind of my own personal thing. While I was watching it, I was kind of taken aback by it. I was like, wow, I have a real division with that. And maybe that speaks something personally to me, but it is kind of interesting to see a documentary about people who have so much passion for something. And I think when you're younger, you can relate more and go, yeah, and that's when I'm going to be a success. And I think I've come to that point where I'm more like, yeah, how does that happen? I really don't understand it. How did they do that? They must have a secret code or know a phone number you call. Maybe I missed that day in high school. I was sick that day and they told everybody how you were financially successful in your life. Maybe that's something for me personally, and that's something I thought about towards the end of the film. But it does show you that passion, that drive of making something that's really important to you, putting everything you have into it. And I think anyone can relate to it, or at least people who are doing something creative like that. If you're into video games, I would recommend this because I think this is probably one of the better video game movies I've ever seen. True and true about actual video games that were actually made and how they were created and going through the development process and the problem with presenting how big PAX is when Fez is being presented at PAX, how big it is to get on these certain release dates, how important that is, which is a big thing pretty much in any medium, has its own like crazy release dates you have to meet. Those were interesting. What's interesting coming from a YouTube perspective, the Super Meat Boy thing felt a little more relatable because it's like you almost have to get a video out at a certain time on a certain day. In the Super Meat Boy segment, they had to get this game out on a certain day to be a part of this big thing so that it could be more successful. And I could really relate to that very well. I was like, oh wow, I know what that's like. But that was still interesting. All the legal battles with Fez, how stressful it is, how hard it was. I don't know if he needed to hang out for 2 days in a hotel room before, but maybe he has that kind of money, or like he had meetings or something. Just seemed like he hung out in a pool. That was a little weird. It's not the tightest documentary. It's not Earl Morris or anything like that. It's kind of just your standard early 2000 teens kind of documentary, but they actually use the subjects and use the subject matter they're going after and make a very compelling film with it. I think a lot of my problems with documentaries is they get away with that quite often, and I think this one's good enough and well made enough within all of the kind of like regular kind of documentary thing that it gets itself to work for it. So I'm not going to like harp on the problems with documentary and how we critique them in this, even though I already have. I am going to say I think I quite enjoyed this movie, and I'd actually recommend it to a lot of people, especially if you're into video games, or if you're into video games, you can be like, fuck these guys suck, they should have done these guys, or if they made it now, it would have been better, or something. I don't know. It is on Netflix, or at least at the time I shot this review, and it's on other things that you can pay for. I actually quite enjoyed it, and I'm glad I eventually saw it. This is a movie people have been asking me to review for like forever. I guess I'm glad that Patreon made me do it in a way. Although I can't necessarily understand the games or even play the games they're talking about in this movie, I can relate to the passion, and I can relate to these people and understand these people and get a side of the video game industry that, since I don't know anything about it, I didn't really know was there. And it reminded me kind of almost of an auteur kind of a thing, that before you have these developers, almost like we have studios, and it almost feels like more of like a pure indie kind of movie way is the way these games are. They have less of an assembly line. They just have a couple people making it, and they're hoping that their hopes and dreams will be fulfilled by making this game, and something will happen because of it. Just like people who make indie movies, just like people who make YouTube reviews hope one day that their lives will be the better for doing it. But I can relate to that part. of Indie Game the Movie. And I think if you have that passion, you definitely can. But I think it works in a very universal way for a subject that I don't think is very universal outside of its own thing. And I think that's a plus, and probably why this film works as well as it does is because it's able to tap into that universal quality of gaming and of these developers and let you peek inside and kind of understand a new side of a medium, or at least a newer side at that time, and kind of tap into it and understand that passion and the pain and everything that goes into making an indie game. And I think Indie Game the Movie fully got into its subject matter and let you peek inside and kind of understand it, just like a decent or good documentary can do. So if you've seen Indie Game the Movie and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And again, if you would like me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below, pledge to the Patreon, and maybe I will be reviewing your choice next month. And sorry I'm in a different location. I watched it at a friend's place, and I used to shoot some videos here a while ago, and they let me shoot in here. And you might recognize this location from like 2013. But yeah, also I didn't have my mic with me. I didn't realize I'd be doing this. But I was like, let's do it. Different location. Why not? And I'm dressed up, so that seems to be the thing now. I don't know. So, but I think it was a good review. I hope so. We'll see. I haven't cut it yet. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.